I entered the house with a tight heart, a weight on my chest that seemed to crush me. The previous weeks had been full of strangeness, but I tried to ignore it, looking for simple reasons for my wife's distant behavior. However, nothing could justify what I discovered that afternoon. On the kitchen table, an invitation lay, subtle, almost like a silent provocation, her boss's company party. It wouldn't have been anything unusual if it hadn't been for the detail that was burning me like an unbearable flame. The invitation was addressed to her and her boss, as a couple. At that moment, I felt as if the ground beneath my feet was crumbling. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize. It could be a mistake. Maybe just a mistake on the part of the organization. But the pang in my stomach wouldn't let up. I knew I needed to know the truth. I picked up the invitation, looked at the address details and the date. It was that evening. "I need to sort something out at the company," she said, without looking me in the eye. Her tone was casual, but it carried a tension that made me shudder. It was a lie, of course. I had always been able to recognize the nuances in her gaze, her gestures and her pauses. But at that moment, I chose not to confront her. Not yet. I just nodded briefly, like someone who consents to something unimportant. She left without even looking back. The pain of seeing her silhouette disappear into the doorway was suffocating, but the determination to know where it would lead was even greater. I grabbed my car keys and followed her. I don't know what hurt more, the hope that I was wrong or the growing certainty that I wasn't. The headlights of my car followed hers at a distance, each curve intensifying the anguish that pulsed in my chest. Until she stopped in front of a luxurious building. There he was, the boss. A man with a confident posture, a broad smile and an intimacy with her that made me nauseous. He led her inside, and I stood still, unable to move for a few moments. What was going on? How could something like this form in the shadows of my marriage? Why hadn't I seen the signs before? Unanswered questions echoed in my mind, but one certainty was beginning to take hold. I had to face it. I couldn't remain silent in the face of this betrayal that was slowly destroying everything I believed to be real. I waited as long as it took for both of them to be sure that no one had followed them. When I entered the party venue, my eyes immediately found them. They were standing near the bar, laughing and exchanging glances that left no doubt. Part of me wanted to run across the room right then and there, to shout, to confront them. But something stopped me. The dignity I still had left demanded more than that. I stayed in the shadows, watching every movement, every gesture. His hands touched her waist possessively, and she, far from backing down, seemed to give in. My throat tightened with the desire to explode, but I stopped myself. I let the pain grow, consume me. Somehow, I knew that the longer I waited, the clearer the truth would become. Hours later, they left the event together. I followed them again, now to a more intimate, more private place. When I finally confronted them, their expressions were a mixture of shock and fear. "You two don't have to worry anymore," I said, as they remained silent, speechless, as if their masks had fallen off. "It's all over here. You," I looked at her, each word carrying an unbreakable weight, "are moving out of my house. I will no longer share my space with someone who has destroyed everything we've built." The room seemed frozen. He opened his mouth, perhaps to try to justify himself, but I interrupted him with a gesture. I didn't want any apologies or explanations. There were no words in the world that could soften what they had done. I left before the silence consumed me completely, leaving them to deal with their own choices and the damage they had caused. However, as I crossed the threshold, one question remained: why did she do it? Was there something I still didn't know? A secret bigger than the lies I saw that night? Something about her didn't make sense, and the look of despair she cast as I left told me that perhaps the truth I had just discovered was only the beginning. Welcome to our channel. Here, we don't support any kind of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry a powerful message: betrayal destroys lives, hearts and trust. Each narrative is a reminder of how wrong choices can lead to devastating consequences. Prepare yourself for a shocking story, full of emotion and twists and turns. Take a deep breath, and let's get started. Alex and Clara were a couple who, to everyone who knew them, seemed unbreakable. They had met during college, when they were both still searching for their own identities and marveling at the possibilities that life offered. Alex was an engineer, practical and reserved, someone who looked for solutions before even identifying problems. Clara, on the other hand, was a literature teacher with a passion for words, details and human emotions. Together, they seemed to complement each other in a natural way. Their marriage, more than a decade old, was a picture of stability. They had 2 young daughters, Emma and Sophie, who brought a vibrant energy to the house, filling the room with children's laughter and cries that mingled with the smell of the coffee Alex made every morning. They lived in a spacious house, not over the top, but comfortable, the fruit of years of joint effort to build a home. Clara was someone who loved detail. She had a special way of decorating the house for each season, preparing her daughters' favorite meals and organizing get-togethers with friends. Her ability to create a feeling of warmth in any environment was one of her qualities most admired by Alex, who used to say that she had a unique talent for turning any place into home. He, for his part, was a man of routine. He worked long hours, but made a point of making time for his daughters in the evenings, helping them with their homework or reading them bedtime stories. Clara always watched this scene with a smile on her lips, feeling grateful to have such a present partner. But, as in any long-term relationship, not everything was perfect. Alex, with his pragmatic manner, sometimes seemed distant, lost in thoughts about work or how to solve life's practical issues. Clara, being more sensitive, felt frustrated by this lack of emotional connection at times. There were occasional arguments, as in any marriage, but nothing they couldn't resolve with patience and sincere conversations. At least that's what Clara believed. Routine was something Alex cherished and, for Clara, something she accepted, even if she felt the need for something more vibrant from time to time. She used to keep these feelings to herself, writing in journals that she kept hidden at the bottom of her drawer. Her thoughts ranged from gratitude for the family she had built to a restlessness that she herself couldn't define. Perhaps it was just the passage of time, the monotony that accompanies stability. Alex never suspected these worries. He believed he was doing everything right, providing for the family, being a present father and a faithful husband. Although Clara wasn't as expressive as she used to be, he attributed this to everyday fatigue. It never crossed his mind that the little signs could mean something deeper. She, for her part, didn't feel ready to confront her own feelings either. She preferred to ignore the discomfort and go on with her life as if nothing was out of place. Their social circle was small, but solid. There were friends they had known since they were first married, neighbors who saw them as a model couple, and work colleagues who always praised Alex's dedication and Clara's charisma. During the holidays, they were known for organizing warm gatherings at home, where laughter filled the rooms and the children played until late. These occasions were the moments when Clara felt a kind of fullness, a break from the restlessness she carried in silence. At work, Alex was respected for his competence. He maintained a cordial relationship with his colleagues, but rarely got involved in social events or corporate parties, preferring to spend his free time with his family. Clara, however, was the opposite. Her outgoing nature made her a striking presence in any environment, whether at the school where she taught or at parent-teacher events. People gravitated towards her, charmed by her empathy and sense of humor. Despite this, there was something Alex had begun to notice in recent months. Clara seemed more distant, more absorbed in her thoughts. There were times when she would lose herself in her phone or in something she was writing on her computer, disconnecting from the rest of the family. He tried to rationalize it as tiredness or just a phase, but he couldn't help feeling a twinge of worry. Alex wasn't the kind of man to be led astray by assumptions, but the feeling that something was changing was persistent. On the other hand, Clara also felt changes. It wasn't just routine or monotony, it was something more subtle, something she herself found difficult to name. Her thoughts often wandered to places she knew were dangerous, but she couldn't help it. There was a gap in her life, a space she didn't know how to fill. Conversations with Alex, once light and full of complicity, had become practical, almost bureaucratic. At school, Clara found refuge. Her students were her greatest joy, and she threw herself into her work with intensity, organizing projects and activities that kept her busy. It was there that she felt most alive, surrounded by energy and creativity. But it was also there that the idea of something beyond began to emerge, a need for something that would make her feel more than just a teacher, a mother, a wife. She wanted to feel wanted, admired, important. This internal conflict was not something she could share with Alex. He, for his part, felt increasingly disconnected from Clara, not knowing how to reach that side of her that seemed to have drifted away. He tried to compensate with practical gestures, bringing flowers from time to time, planning little outings for the family, but nothing seemed to have the impact he wanted. Clara thanked him, smiled, but the sparkle in her eyes was no longer the same. Daily life went on, with its little joys and challenges. The girls continued to be the center of Alex's world, and Clara maintained a facade of happiness that everyone around her believed to be genuine. But behind this facade, something was brewing, something that would change their lives irreversibly. They were both trapped in a silent dance of appearances and expectations, without realizing that the chasm between them was growing every day. That particular evening, when Alex found the invitation on the table, he didn't know that he was about to enter a completely different chapter of his life. And Clara, as she walked out the door with a hesitant smile, also had no idea that the fine line separating their worlds was about to break down. Their fate was at stake, and nothing would ever be the same. The days following the invitation were marked by a silent tension in Alex and Clara's home. He tried hard to maintain a semblance of normality, but every detail of the routine now seemed to carry extra weight. The sound of his daughter's laughter sounded distant, almost like an echo of a past that seemed increasingly unreachable. Clara, for her part, continued to play her role as mother and wife with meticulous dedication, but Alex could see that something was deeply wrong. The morning after dinner, Alex watched Clara prepare the girls' lunchboxes. Her movements were precise, as always, but there was something in her gaze, an absence that he couldn't ignore. He tried to start a conversation, but the words seemed to get lost in the air before they reached her. "You look tired lately," he said, in a casual tone that barely concealed his concern. "Is everything all right?" Clara paused for a moment, her gaze fixed on the cutting board. Then she smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just work, nothing to worry about." But Alex did worry. He began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. The messages on her phone, always quick and accompanied by a slight smile, made him uncomfortable. Clara had a new sparkle in her eyes, but it wasn't a sparkle aimed at him. She was more absent, physically and emotionally, and her excuses to leave the house became more frequent. Work meetings, visits to colleagues, a few minutes, that turned into hours. Every time she went out, Alex felt a growing unease. One day, while Clara was getting ready for one of the meetings, Alex couldn't help but notice the extra care she put into her appearance. The new dress, the expensive perfume he hadn't seen for months. He didn't say anything, but inside a doubt began to turn into certainty. There was something she wasn't sharing, and it was eroding everything he believed about their marriage. That night, after Clara left, Alex was alone with his thoughts. He picked up his phone and, hesitating for a moment, decided to send a casual message, "I need to talk to you about something important when I get back." The reply came quickly but coldly, "Of course. Later." Hours passed, and Alex lay awake, the sound of the clock in the living room seeming louder than ever. When Clara finally returned, she was different. There was something in her posture, in the way she avoided his gaze. He tried to start a conversation, but she quickly cut him off, claiming to be exhausted. The tension between them was palpable, but Alex decided to wait. He knew something was about to unfold. A few days later, Alex made a decision. He needed proof, something to confirm his suspicions. One quiet morning, while Clara was in the shower, he picked up her cell phone from the table. Heart racing, he opened the recent messages. What he found left him breathless. Conversations full of innuendo and detailed plans for dates. The name that appeared again and again was that of a work colleague, someone he had only heard of. Alex's world fell apart. He closed the phone carefully, as if touching it once more would confirm the reality he didn't want to accept. Clara came out of the bathroom shortly afterwards, smiling casually. He tried not to show it, but the weight of what he had discovered made it impossible to hide. That evening, Clara mentioned that there was a company party at the weekend and casually asked if he would like to go. Alex hesitated for a moment before agreeing. He knew it was the perfect opportunity to understand what was really going on. She looked surprised, but didn't question it. He saw a glimmer of something in her eyes, perhaps fear, perhaps hesitation, but again she remained silent. When the day of the party arrived, Alex watched Clara get ready with a precision that seemed almost calculated. She looked beautiful, but there was something about the way she avoided his gaze that only confirmed what he already knew. On the way to the venue, the conversation was light, but charged with an invisible tension. When they arrived, Alex watched her every move, every interaction. He greeted colleagues politely, but kept his attention fixed on Clara. It didn't take long for him to notice the pattern. The coworker who appeared in the messages always seemed to be nearby, their gazes crossing frequently and their quick smiles being exchanged like secrets. Alex kept a low profile, but his mind was racing. He knew he needed more, he needed to see for himself to put an end to any remaining doubts. At a certain point, Clara and her colleague discreetly left the party. Alex waited a few minutes before following them, keeping a safe distance. The place where they stopped was a small hotel not far from the event. Alex stood in the car for a few minutes, trying to control his breathing and the whirlwind of emotions that was taking over him. He entered the hotel and, with the event bracelet still on his wrist, gained access to the floor where he saw them disappear. The door ajar revealed everything he had feared. Clara and her colleague were together, laughing, in an intimate moment that destroyed any hope Alex might have had of being mistaken. He stood there, for a few seconds that seemed like hours, until the pain gave way to a strange calm. So that's it, he thought, as he pushed the door open slightly. The expression on their faces changed instantly at the sight of him. The shock was absolute, as if they were statues frozen in time. Alex didn't say anything straight away, he just looked at Clara, who tried to mumble something, but couldn't find any words. He then spoke, his voice firm but low, charged with a controlled anger. It all makes sense now. He left before either of them could react. As he left, Alex knew that this was not the last time he would face the two of them. There was more at stake than just betrayal, and he was determined to find out everything. But what Clara didn't know, and what Alex was about to discover, was that the worst was yet to come. Alex couldn't sleep the night after the confrontation. The image of Clara standing next to her colleague, the nervous smile she tried to force when he caught them, it all seemed tattooed on his mind. He felt betrayed, not just by the act itself, but by the long string of lies Clara had carefully put together to hide the truth. What consumed him, however, was the feeling that that wasn't all. Something was still hidden, something he needed to find out. The next morning, Alex decided to act. He knew that facing Clara directly at that moment would be pointless, she was defensive, and he needed clear answers before facing the next step. While Clara tried to go about her routine as if nothing had happened, Alex began to put the pieces together. He called a private detective that a friend had referred him to years ago, when another colleague was facing a similar situation. He knew not to trust his intuition until he had something concrete in hand. The days that followed were tense, almost unbearable. Clara did her best to avoid any direct confrontation, but Alex knew she was aware that he had seen everything. They barely exchanged words, and when they did, the tone was cold, calculated. Meanwhile, Alex anxiously awaited the information the detective had promised to gather. One Tuesday afternoon, Alex's phone rang. It was the detective, who asked to meet at a discreet cafe. Alex drove to the place with his hands firmly on the steering wheel, as if the control he exerted over the car was the only thing keeping it from falling apart. When he arrived, he found the detective already waiting, with a folder on the table and a serious expression. "You were right," the man began, bluntly. "But there's more here than you probably realized." He pushed the folder towards Alex, who hesitated before opening it. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. Photos, messages, documents. It wasn't just the betrayal that Clara was hiding. It was the fact that her boss, with whom she was involved, was using her in a scheme that involved manipulating sensitive company information. "That doesn't make sense," muttered Alex, trying to process the information. The detective continued, "They've been at it together for a while. He manipulates her, but she seems to be aware of what she's doing. There's a clear exchange of favors here. He provides the resources, and she helps in other ways." Alex closed the folder, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. It wasn't just the emotional betrayal. Clara had crossed a line that compromised everything he believed in. This woman, who he loved, who he trusted to raise his daughters by his side, was involved in something that threatened to destroy not only their marriage, but also the company's reputation and financial stability. When he got home that evening, Alex found Clara in the living room, reading a book as if nothing had happened. He approached her slowly, feeling the tension rise with every step. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm. Clara looked at him, surprised, but not surprised enough. She knew this moment would come. "Alex, she began, but he held up his hand, interrupting her. "No. This time, you're going to listen." He placed the folder on the table in front of her and opened it, spreading out the documents. "This is what you've been doing while pretending our life was perfect." Clara looked at the papers, her face paling. "Alex, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you destroyed our family for this? That you've put everything we've built at risk for a man who's clearly taking advantage of you? I thought I knew you, Clara. But now I see that you're a stranger to me." His words cut Clara like a knife. Tears began to fill her eyes, but she couldn't speak. Alex continued, anger and pain mixing in his voice. "Do you know what this means? It's not just about us. It's about our daughters, our reputation, everything we've built together." Clara tried to defend herself, but her words were weak, almost inaudible. "I didn't know it would come to this, Alex. I got carried away. He promised me things, made me believe that I deserved more than what? Than our life? Than me? Our daughters?" Alex slammed the table, his voice echoing around the room. "You're blind, Clara. And now, we're all going to pay the price." Clara finally collapsed, crying uncontrollably. "I didn't want this to happen. I was unhappy, yes, but I never wanted to destroy everything." Alex shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "Do you think saying you didn't want it is enough? It's not, Clara. You made choices. Choices that brought us here." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara remained seated, her face buried in her hands, while Alex looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. He knew that moment was a watershed. There was no going back, not after what he had discovered. "This ends here," he finally said, his voice low but full of determination. "I'm going to go through with it, Clara. Not for revenge, but because I can't allow this to continue. You've made your choices, now you'll have to deal with the consequences." He got up and went to his room, leaving Clara alone in the living room, still crying. Alex knew that the next steps would be difficult, but he also knew that he needed to protect himself and his daughters. What Clara didn't know, however, was that Alex had already planned how to expose her boss and save what was left of the company. And Clara, in tears, realized that her world was about to fall apart in a way she had never imagined. The next day, Alex couldn't concentrate on his work. Every time he tried to resume his tasks, the image of Clara crying in the living room, sunk under the weight of her own choices, returned to his mind. But he knew he couldn't give in to pity. There was too much at stake. The messages, the documents, the evidence the detective had handed over confirmed that the betrayal went far beyond the personal. She had put not only her marriage at risk, but also everything he and so many others had built in the company. Determined to act, Alex arranged a meeting with the partners for that afternoon. He would need to be careful when broaching the subject, but he was determined to expose Clara's boss before the damage became irreversible. On his way to the meeting room, he received a message on his phone. It was from Clara. Just 3 words, "We need to talk now." He ignored it. At the office, Alex presented the evidence objectively, without mentioning personal involvement. Documents detailing the misuse of sensitive information began to circulate among those present, and the shock was visible on the faces of his colleagues. "If we allow this to continue," Alex said firmly, "not only will we ruin our reputation, but we could face serious legal consequences." There were murmurs of agreement and looks of disapproval at the name of the boss mentioned in the papers. At the end of the meeting, the partners decided to investigate thoroughly, but Alex knew that wouldn't be enough. He needed one final blow to ensure that the man who had dragged Clara into the scheme had no way out. The feeling of justice drove him, but there was something else. He wanted to regain control of the situation that, for so long, seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Back home, Alex found Clara waiting for him in the kitchen. The table was set with 2 cups of coffee, but he knew it wasn't a gesture of reconciliation. She was pale, with deep-set eyes, as if she hadn't slept. When he entered, she stood up suddenly, as if she didn't know whether to sit or walk. "Alex, please, I need to explain," he held up his hand, interrupting her. "You've already had your chance to explain. Now it's my turn to talk." Clara remained silent, but her hands were shaking. He took a deep breath and continued, his tone cold and calculated. "I went to the company today. Your boss isn't going to get away with this. And, as hard as it is to admit, neither will you." Clara took a step back, leaning against the sink, as if his words were a physical blow. "Alex, I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but it's not just my fault." He arched an eyebrow, his expression laden with skepticism. "And whose else would it be? You chose to get involved with him. You chose to lie, to betray, and worse, to compromise the integrity of everything we've built." "He threatened me," Clara said suddenly, her voice low but full of emotion. Alex stopped, surprised by the confession. "At first, I didn't know what I was getting into. He started with small requests, things that seemed innocent, and then, when I tried to get out of it, he started pressuring me. He said that if I didn't cooperate, he would destroy my career and break up our family. I was scared, Alex." There was something in his tone that made Alex hesitate. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, he saw something different in Clara's eyes. It wasn't just regret. It was terror. But he wasn't ready to trust her again. "Do you expect me to believe that? That you were just a victim in this story? Because all I see is someone who chose to carry on, even knowing the price." Clara burst into tears again, but this time there was no scream, no attempt to justify her actions. She looked defeated, consumed by the weight of it all. "I don't know what to say to make you believe me, Alex. I've made horrible mistakes, but I'm not lying about it. He trapped me in a way that I didn't know how to escape." Alex was silent for a few moments, analyzing every word, every movement. Finally, he said, "If that's true, then you need to prove it. You need to show me that you're willing to take responsibility for what you've done and help make it right." Clara nodded, still crying. I'll do whatever it takes. The next day, Clara decided to confront her boss directly. She knew she was risking everything, but at that moment she felt she had no other choice. Alex accompanied her to his office, but stayed outside, waiting. She entered the room with her heart racing, but determined to end the farce once and for all. "You lied to me," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. "You used my vulnerability, you manipulated me. But that ends here. I won't be a part of it anymore." The man laughed, a cold, calculated laugh that made Clara shudder. "Do you think you can just walk away like that? You know it's not that simple. Everything that's happened can fall on you too." She took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she had. "I don't mind. I'm willing to face the consequences, but I'm not going to be your puppet anymore." Before he could reply, the door to the room opened, revealing Alex and two lawyers, who entered with briefcases and a serious expression. The boss, taken by surprise, lost his composure for a moment, but quickly tried to pull himself together. "What's this? You can't come in here unannounced." Alex stepped forward, his voice laden with determination. "This is the end of the line for you. We have everything we need to prove your actions, and I guarantee you won't get away with it." The chief turned pale, his confidence beginning to crumble. He tried to threaten them, but Alex's firmness and the presence of the lawyers made it clear that he had no way out. Clara, for her part, remained silent, watching as the man who had manipulated her was confronted by the evidence she herself had helped to provide. When it was all over, Alex and Clara left the building together, but in a heavy silence. They knew that this was only the beginning of a long process, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of closure, that things were finally moving in the right direction. In the car, Alex looked at Clara. "That doesn't mean everything is settled between us. But you took an important step today." She just nodded, the tears returning to her eyes, but this time mixed with a thread of hope. As they drove home, they both knew that there was still a lot to face, but also that, somehow, they were ready to face whatever came. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, the future could still be rebuilt. After everything that had happened, the silence between Alex and Clara was an almost insurmountable barrier. On the drive home, they were both trapped in their own thoughts, reflecting on the impact of their actions and decisions. Alex felt a mixture of relief and bitterness. He had managed to expose Clara's boss, protect his company and, at the same time, confront the woman who had once been the love of his life. But none of this brought the peace he had hoped for. There was a gap, a feeling of emptiness that no victory could fill. Clara, on the other hand, felt shattered. Standing up to her boss and taking her share of the blame had taken more out of her than she could have imagined. She didn't know if she had done enough to start repairing what she had broken, but she was sure that the road would be long and arduous. Every time she looked at Alex, she saw the disappointment in his eyes, a pain she knew might never go away. When they got home, Alex went straight to his room, closing the door with a firmness that Clara interpreted as a warning not to follow him. She stayed in the living room, sitting on the sofa, watching the emptiness. Her daughters were with their grandparents, which meant that the house was quieter than ever. The silence was deafening, full of unsaid things, resentments and regrets. Clara knew she had to do something to win back Alex's trust, but she had no idea where to start. Alex spent hours sitting on the bed, staring at the walls. The sense of control he had had during the confrontation with the boss now seemed to slip out of his hands. He didn't know how to move forward, how to rebuild his life. On the one hand, he wanted to leave everything behind, to start again without Clara, without the memories of betrayal. On the other, he felt a responsibility for the family they had built together, for their daughters who still saw them as a solid foundation, even if that foundation was cracked. The next morning, Clara took courage and knocked on the bedroom door. "Alex, can we talk?" Her voice was hesitant, almost pleading. He took his time answering, but finally opened the door. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Clara sat on the end of the bed, while Alex stood, arms crossed. "I know words aren't enough," she began, avoiding his gaze. "I know I've hurt you in a way that may never be possible to repair, but I want to try. I want to find a way to at least win back your trust." Alex shook his head, a bitter smile appearing on his lips. "Trust? Clara, do you understand what happened? It's not just about us. You put our family at risk. You made choices that affected everything we built, everything that was important to us." "I know," she replied, her voice shaking. "And that's why I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. That I would do anything to have the chance to prove it." Alex sighed, sitting down in the chair next to the bed. He looked at her, studying every feature of her face, trying to find some sincerity in her words. "Do you think regret is enough? That saying you're willing to change will erase everything that's happened?" "No," Clara answered quickly. "I know it's not enough. But it's a start. Please, Alex, tell me what I can do. I don't want to lose you, I don't want to lose our family." He was silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "If you really want to try, Clara, then you need to understand that it won't be easy. It won't be quick. And, honestly, I don't know if it's possible. But if you're willing to face the consequences, then I'm willing to at least consider it." His words gave Clara a glimmer of hope, but they also filled her with a deep fear. She knew that she would have to face Alex's trial every day, that her every move would be scrutinized, that every word could be used as evidence against her. But even so, she decided she had no choice. She had to try. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Alex kept his distance, but Clara persisted, trying to demonstrate her sincerity in every possible way. She began attending therapy sessions, both individual and couple, in the hope that this would help rebuild communication between them. Alex reluctantly agreed to take part, but his answers were short and he seemed more interested in observing Clara than opening up. At home, Clara did everything to show that she was committed. She prepared Alex's favorite meals, took care of her daughters with even more dedication and tried to find moments to talk, even though he often ignored her. But there were moments when she saw something change, a small glimmer of emotion in his eyes, as if he wanted to believe her, but didn't yet know how. Alex, for his part, was facing his own internal dilemmas. He knew he had the right to move on without Clara, to restart his life without carrying the weight of what had happened. But something inside him still held him to her, perhaps the love that had once been so strong, perhaps the desire to protect his daughters from the impact of a separation. He didn't know for sure. All he knew was that he was caught between the past and the future, unable to decide which way to go. One evening, while Clara was in the kitchen, Alex walked in, taking her by surprise. He approached her slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice low. Clara stopped what she was doing, turning to face him. "And what have you concluded?" she asked, her heart in her throat. "I've concluded that, as much as I want to believe you, I still can't. Not completely. But I also realized that if I don't try, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if it could have worked." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's all I ask, Alex. One chance. Just one." He took a deep breath, before saying, "Then let's see where it takes us. But know that this doesn't mean I'm forgiving you. There's still a long way to go." As Clara cried, Alex felt a slight sense of relief. It wasn't the end of the suffering, but perhaps it was the beginning of something new. Maybe. Time passed, but the wounds left by the betrayal and the chaos that followed didn't disappear so easily. Alex and Clara continued their therapy sessions, trying to rebuild what had been destroyed, but trust, once broken, proved to be an almost impossible barrier to overcome. Every attempt to reconnect was accompanied by a subtle doubt, a heavy silence that filled the spaces between the words. Clara plunged headlong into her journey of redemption, dedicating herself completely to her family and the process of rebuilding. She knew that her actions had had devastating consequences and she was willing to pay the price, even if it meant constantly living under Alex's watchful eye. She enrolled in courses, started doing volunteer work and dedicated herself to activities that could show her daughters that choices have consequences, but that it is possible to learn and grow from mistakes. Alex, for his part, was still fighting his own demons. Clara's betrayal had changed him in ways he didn't fully understand. He tried to move on, stay calm and focus on his daughters, but there were times when the memory of everything that had happened came back full force, making him question his choices. He constantly asked himself whether he was right to give Clara a second chance or whether he should have taken another path. While Clara tried to prove her sincerity, Alex went back to concentrating on his work, helping the company recover from the scandal that almost ruined it. The exposure of Clara's boss brought unexpected consequences. As well as losing his job and facing legal proceedings, he became the target of a wider investigation, revealing a corruption scheme that involved other members of senior management. Alex worked hard to keep the company's reputation intact, but the experience made him even more cynical and suspicious. It was in this context that Alex began to realize something he hadn't expected. In the midst of meetings and late nights at the office, he became close to a colleague, Laura, a consultant hired to help restructure the company. Laura was everything Alex didn't know he needed: intelligent, insightful and, above all, honest. She listened to him without judgment, offering a perspective he couldn't find in anyone else. The connection between them grew organically, without haste, but undeniably strong. Laura knew about Alex's past, and he felt comfortable sharing his pain with her. On the other hand, Clara began to notice the change in Alex. It wasn't just the emotional distance, there was something more. She saw in his eyes the same sparkle he used to have at the beginning of their relationship, but now directed towards someone else. One day, during a tense conversation, Clara confronted Alex. "There is someone, isn't there?" Alex hesitated, but knew that lying would be pointless. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "But nothing's happened. Not yet. I don't want to hurt you or the girls, but I don't know if I can go on like this." Clara felt as if the ground was opening up under her feet. She knew she deserved it, but even so, the pain was unbearable. "Alex, I love you. I know I ruined everything, but I was willing to spend the rest of my life trying to fix it." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that Clara hadn't seen for months: compassion. "I know, Clara. But maybe what we're trying to fix no longer exists. Maybe it's time we accepted that." The decision to separate was mutual, but painful. The daughters reacted with sadness, but Alex and Clara did their best to ensure that the impact on them was minimized. Clara kept the house, while Alex moved to a nearby apartment, ensuring he could be there for the girls. They shared parental responsibilities evenly, but living together was always surrounded by a slight discomfort, a constant reminder of what had happened. Clara continued on her path of self-discovery and reconstruction, now on her own. She found a new purpose in voluntary work, helping women who faced similar situations to the one she had experienced. Her journey of redemption was not just for Alex or her daughters, but for herself, out of a need to become someone she could be proud of again. Alex, on the other hand, began to explore his relationship with Laura, but cautiously. He knew he needed time to heal the scars left by the past before giving himself over completely to something new. Laura, patient and understanding, didn't push, allowing Alex to go at his own pace. Clara's former boss faced a public trial that ended with his conviction. The company survived, but with deep scars. Alex was promoted, recognized for his integrity and leadership during the crisis, but he knew that the personal cost of this victory was something he would carry forever. In the end, they each went their separate ways, but with lessons that would shape their lives forever. Clara learned the value of honesty and responsibility, while Alex discovered that, even in the midst of pain, it was possible to start again. And now we want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment below, share your opinion and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Remember, we don't support any kind of betrayal here. All the stories are fictional and serve as a reminder of how choices can impact lives. See you next time.